Okay, so what we're going to talk about next is basically building a custom ROM, right? So we're now talking about the entire platform, right? So far, before this, we were talking about how an application is going to interact with the low-level stuff. Now we're going to look at the entire platform. So in context of that, so this is roughly what we're going to talk about. So what it takes to build the source, right? Your homework, what you guys did for homework, I'm going to explain that a little bit. We're going to go through the source code and explain what is in the source code. So you know what kind of files are where, if you wanted to modify something, so you have an idea what you're modifying. Then we're gonna modify the source, but we're gonna do it sort of in stages. We're gonna do the simplest thing first, and then we're gonna add more features. First we're gonna add an application. Okay. Next, we're gonna add well, we're not really gonna add a native library, but we're gonna talk about adding a native library, right? Next, we're gonna talk about changing the startup process, right? Like, what if you wanted your application to start up first, or not start at all, or some other system service not to start, or replace a system service, that sort of stuff, right? Then we're gonna talk a little bit about permissions. I think somebody was asking about permissions as well, so we're gonna talk a little bit about that. And finally, we're going to talk about modifying the framework, one of the frameworks, right? What would it take to modify a framework? So which frameworks are you guys supporting? So it's telephony. What else? Location, Wi-Fi, GPS, surface flinger, sensors. So you're supporting a whole bunch of them, right? Okay. So we're going to talk about some of them. Maybe we'll pick one and we'll talk about it in more detail. We'll see a couple examples. Okay. What about the kernel? The first thing I wanted to kind of get out of the way is that kernel itself is a separate project, right? So kernel is not really part of Android. But what I mean by kernel, I mean the kernel, the core of it, right? So that's not necessarily part of Android open source project. That's a separate project altogether, right? We're building on top of the kernel, but kernel, for the most purposes, you can just consider it to be the standard Linux kernel, right? It's not quite standard. There's some changes, but for the most our purposes, we're just going to consider it just a standard Linux kernel, and then build on top of that, right? Any questions about the kernel? Okay, so let's talk about getting the source. So to get a source, you basically go to source-android.com, right? That's where the source comes from. Let's see, do we have access to that site? Oh, we do, right? So this is where everything comes regarding the platform. So if you're developing applications, you go to developer-android.com. If you're developing platform, you go to source-android.com. Okay. So you would then typically go to source, okay, and then you would typically go and click on getting the source. Okay. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, right? No? Yeah. Alright, so like I said, first of all, you would need to set up your machine. It's got to be either a Linux machine or a Mac machine. It cannot be a Windows machine. This is not possible in Windows. Okay. Because the tools are not available. So what we have, some of you guys are using my 64-bit machine. Some of you are using my 32-bit machine. There are quite a few differences between the two. So basically, up until Froyo, we were using Java 5. Okay. So for the longest time, Android required Java 5, which is a very old Java. It's about 6 years old, something like that. Okay. From now on, from Gingerbread, we're using Java 6, so that makes a big difference, right, in preparing the virtual machine and all that. And Gingerbread also requires a 32-bit, so that's sort of the difference as well. Okay, so I'm going to run it on OS 10 because that's just my platform, so I configured all this. Okay, next is we installed repo, right? So we downloaded that tool. we initialized repo, right? We initialized it. We did repo sync, repo init. But before we didn't do this repo init because this would just get the latest code. You may not want to get the latest code because sometimes it's, you know, in my experience I had broken code that I got. It could have been non-documented setup, but it was a broken code nonetheless. So if you want to check out something from a branch that's different than a master branch, then you basically specify the branch by specifying -b. So those of you on 32-bit, you have Froyo for -b branch, right? Those of you on 64, you have Gingerbread. Okay. Next, we did repo sync. Okay. And got the source code. By the way, how long did it take you to do the repo sync? It shouldn't. I mean, it does take a while if it's from scratch because you're downloading about 2.6 gigabytes worth of files. There's a lot of files. Okay, but I already, you know, I already had some stuff pre-downloaded, so it should not take that long because you already had a bunch of source in the virtual machine, depending on the virtual machine. Okay. So next, what we did is once we downloaded the source code, we did the following steps. We moved into the directory, Froyo or Gingerbread. We sourced build env setup. We did launch and we did make. Okay. So those are the steps. The result of that is that you guys got a directory. I'll show you in the virtual machine. So you guys got a directory like this, right? So Gingerbread or Froyo, and it's got a bunch of stuff in here. Okay, can everyone find that directory? Right? And if you don't, you can just grab the source code that I gave you, right? So what we want to do next is let me show you. I'm going to show you that in here because I have it on my Mac like this. So it's the same kind of same stuff. Just it's a little easier for me to explain it. So what we're going to do is look through the source code a little bit. So we talked about these steps, right? We're going to now talk about what is which folder. And you kind of have it outlined here as well in the notes. So let's take a look at this. So basically, Bionic. Does anybody remember what Bionic is? Yeah, it's a C library, right? So that's a C library that was developed for Android. So that's basically where it's at. So you can see that there's a libc, libdl, libmath, standard C++, headers, and so on, right? So that's Bionic. Probably not too interesting to us. This is the bootable disks, so bootloader, disk loader, disk installer, and recovery disk. This is a build system. So this is where all the make stuff is, make files, right? So this tends to be sort of the complex part of the system, right? So what we have here is we have the build system. Now, a build system is going to go pick a specific target, specific board, and specific product. So in other words, it's a multi-dimensional sort of build, right? When you do a make, you're building a specific target for a specific architecture and a specific product, right? Let me show you a couple of documents that are useful. In source.android.com, there's this tab here called porting. This is where the build system is somewhat explained, okay? So these are the various layers that you can put on top of the into the build system. So you can specify what kind of product you're building. In other words, what locale is it for? Is it for a Chinese market, Japanese market, European market, American market, right? So that would be the, you can specify that. What kind of device is it? Is it a device with a keyboard or without a keyboard, right? What kind of board is it? Is it, what's the what kind of information you have on the board? Board, for some reason, the board information is nicknamed after fish. So that's right, sardine, trout, goldfish. Goldfish stands for emulator. So when you say goldfish, that usually means the emulator. Okay? And finally, what kind of architecture we're building for. So that's the kind of stuff we can configure in terms of layers, right? So building the platform, you did choose combo or lunch, right, to make it, or you can do like this: product generic user, product generic eng, right? So this is basically going to tell it what kind of product we want to build, right? And you know, there are different setups for user versus eng. It usually has to do with system settings. Like somebody was asking about system properties. So some of those are differently configured if you want an engineering build versus user build. Things like ADB may be disabled or enabled. It depends on what kind of build you're doing. mclean cleans your directory. Make clobber is going to clean up all the combos, right? Speeding up the rebuild, you can basically say export use cache to perform to basically reuse some of the build stuff, because the build you're gonna find can run quite slowly, right? So that's what happens with a build. Kernel itself, so that's the building kernel. You know, what happens with that. Kernel itself is shipped as a pre-built module, so we actually have it as a compiled module. Okay, if you want to build your own, you can git check it out. You can get it via git, right? So building the kernel. These are the differences. Some of the system property differences, for example, between versions, right? So eng, so it's the default flavor, right? And that's same as doing make eng, right? And it's going to install all those modules. And it's going to do the following. So basically, security is going to be 0, debuggable is going to be true, and kernel Android check JNI is going to be 1, and ADB is going to be enabled. Those are some settings, right? User, right? So this is the final release. This is if you're shipping it on a device. So secure is going to be true, debuggable false, ADB disabled. This is once you're ready to put it on a device and ship it, right? User debug is the same as user, just allows the debug as well, right? So we probably, you know, this is something that's easy to change later on. So we probably want to do engineering build, right? Because we want to have all the information, right? So that's basically what happens. So you can configure a new product. So this is the configuring a new product page. I'll show you that in a second as soon as it loads up. I guess our network is slow, or it doesn't, you know, it doesn't help that I'm uploading all the movie files up to a server. So, okay. So you can configure things that are specific to a vendor, right? So if you want, for example, something specific to Qualcomm, we can make a directory called you know, vendor and then Qualcomm, and then within that we can specify our own products and create our own make files, right? So we can make vendor, Qualcomm, products, and then create, for example, eng or release or user, that sort of stuff. And then in that make file we can override the information about the product and the device. Right? So for example, if you have a specific device, you can change that here, right? And then so you can specify the targets. You can configure the board. Like, so remember, it's a multi-layer build system, right? So you can configure the product, but you can also configure different boards, right? For example, are you going to have support for audio drivers or not? Right? You may have a board that doesn't have audio drivers, right? Are you going to have support for radio, right, or not? So this is basically how we're specifying the path for the radio. This is using the radio driver, or at least the library, right? So those are overlays on top of that, right? What kind of kernel, what kind of kernel we're going to use for that particular device, right? So it's going to look like this, right? So Qualcomm, right? Board It's going to be a specific board. Then products, you may have eng, user, final, and that sort of stuff, right? So these are optional makefiles. You guys already have this somewhere with some other team, right? There's another team that does this for you, okay? But so you know, you may or may not care what happens, but that's what happens. These are the various settings for products, right? Product name, it's basically a visible name, right? That's going to appear in about the phone, right? So that's the product name, right? That's, you know, if I go here, home, let me zoom out, menu, right? Settings. I think it's the last one. About the phone, right? Bam. So model number, version, baseband version, kernel version, build number, right? SDK, eng 2.3 test keys, right? So this tells you, you can't see it, but this tells you what build it was built on, right? So that's that. Product model, that's the model name, so that's the model. Number is SDK, right? Locales, right? So locales is basically what we're supporting. So for example, you may say, okay, this version of the phone is supporting English in Britain, German, Spanish, and French in Canada. Okay, so you can specify the languages. Product packages. You can specify the list of calendars that a list of applications that you're going to include, because not every build has to include all the applications. Devices. So this is the industrial design of the device. So Dream is HTC. It's one of the HTC phones, right? And so on. Manufacturer, brand, right? Product overrides. So these are your key value pairs for sysprops, right? Public key for over-the-air updates, right? Policies, package overlays, contributor files, and tags, right? So this is what a product may look like when it's all said and done. So far following? Yeah? So right now we're talking about the build. We're still here, right? We're just talking about the build. Or in other words, we are talking about here. So see, build, target, board. So when you said lunch, and you said, let's see, if I go, let me Control C. Okay, so this is my ADB here. Okay, let me do this. I'm gonna go to my volume gingerbread, right? That's where my gingerbread is installed. You guys did something like this. You did source, and you did build env setup, right? This was the part of the homework, right? Bam. That loads the various vendor setups, right? So this is, for example, loading the device for including files for Samsung, for HTC, and so on. Okay. Now we did lunch and lunch. If you didn't do lunch 1, it would ask you, what do you want to build? Okay. So here's what we are saying. I'm saying I want to build generic engineering, full passion user debug, full Crespo user debug. So basically, if I say full passion, that's going to include, so see this full passion, that's going to include this vendor setup, okay? Right? And if I pick this one, it's going to include this vendor setup, right? So that is that's basically what that does, right? Yeah. So if I say generic engineering, so you can just press, I guess you can press 1. Okay. So now what just happened is it configured my platform, right? Make sense? So this information that you've been seeing, so here's what happened. it basically went here and it said it's going to take generic, which is right here, right? So the board is going to be generic, okay? And the release is going to be generic engineering, right? So it's going to be the generic eng, right? So it's going to include that. It's going to include those packages, right? So that's for the product, and for the for this one, it's going to include that board stuff. So it's going to use this board config, for example, to decide on the type of a board we're going to use, and it's going to use this generic here to decide what we're going to include, right? Okay. So that's where product name, device, brand, right? That's where that information goes. Make sense? So that's our setup, and this was that file that we this is that file that we ran to set up the environment. Open with TextMate. Let me see. I don't want to do this. Okay, so this is the file that we use for lunch, right? So this basically sets up a bunch of variables, right? Okay. So that's gonna do that. It also adds a couple of make stuff. Make from the top of the tree. Make modules in the current subdirectory. Modules in the supplied directories. So these are some helper functions that we're gonna make system things that we're also gonna be using later on. Just so you know. Okay. So that's basically the environment that we set up. Okay. So any questions on this so far? The build system, how it works, how it includes various parts. So that's the build. That's basically how this gets built. Okay. So I'm going to close this, and we're going to talk about. We're going to move down this list. Okay. And then we're going to we'll make some changes to this later on, just so you know. But just for now, I'm going to leave it as is. So that's build. CTS. CTS is stands for Compatibility Test Suite. Okay. So what CTS basically is a way to test if your Android system meets requirements to be an Android system, right? So this is basically Android's answer to the issue of fragmentation, right? You might have heard how Android is getting fragmented. You know, what are we going to do about that? There are all these different Android versions, and which one is really an Android, and so on and so on. So the answer to that was to basically create a set of tests, and those tests live here under compatibility, right? Right. And it's a way for you to test if your device, your new ROM, is truly an Android device, right? So, for example, you know, I worked with putting Android in, for example, a car, right? Like for a dashboard, right? Or into a photocopier, or into a set-top box, right? So those are custom versions of Android, but they're not what you would expect, right? Like in a car, you can't touch that stuff, right? It's just to show you, right? So it doesn't have, for example, touch on the dashboard, right? And you can't really download applications while you're driving. That would be dangerous, right? So a lot of people don't even know it's Android, right? So would that pass compatibility? Probably not, right? Because compatibility also says which are the minimum applications you must have, and so on and so on. So that's what compatibility is, okay? So it's a set of tests, all right? So that's what CTS is here. Next, what we have is Dalvik. So this is the Dalvik virtual machine is right here, okay? Well, the virtual machine is right here. The the compiler is right here, and so on and so on. This is the libraries for it, etc. So that's Dalvik, the Dalvik code. Now, so when you guys are not are you porting to a new architecture altogether, by any chance? Are you porting Android to a new architecture, like to say MIPS architecture or something? Nothing like that. Okay. So if you were to port, right, I mean, on one hand you have to recompile all the C code, right? That's easy. Well, that's recompiling all the C code and providing drivers and so on. Now, second part would be to get Dalvik to work so that you can run all the Dalvik code, because half of the code is Dalvik. It's Java basically compiled, right? So that would mean porting Dalvik to that new platform. And Dalvik sort of comes in two flavors. There's the standard C, NCC version, which should be easy to port. It's not going to be optimized, but it's going to work, right? And then there's the optimized version for ARM and I believe x86, but I'm not sure. Okay, that's Dalvik. These are some development reference files. Okay, nothing very interesting to us. Devices. This is where the device-specific things are, right? So, so for example, remember how we included the HTC Passion? There was a full. I believe this was what was included when we did lunch, right? So that's what that file is, right? So this is the file that was included, for example, for lunch, right? So that specifies that this is full Passion, device is full Passion, Android for Passion, right? So that's kind of how HTC does it. And then this is how it further included some make files. Okay. So that's Passion. So that's for HTC. Samsung has its own. This is a sample if you were gonna do your own, right? So if you're creating your own device, these are some common things. So GPS, for example, configuration for. Let's see. Let me see how to open this up. So other. TextMate. So these are config information, for example, for various GPS data, right? Okay. So those are the common properties, right? So and then we have some specific ones. So that's devices. Now, after devices, one of the very important ones is external. So external is simply everything that comes from outside of Android project, but it's brought into Android project, right? So these are essentially, these end up being your libraries, system libraries. So a lot of these things end up in system lib directory, right? You know I'm talking about system lib directory, remember? So that's where, for example, Apache web server, right here, zip, Chrome, let's see, what else is familiar here? JPEG, diff, JUnit support, OpenSSL, OAuth, ping, PPP, QEMU, this is for the emulator, right? SQLite, file system, zlib, and so on and so on. Skia for your Surface, right? 2D graphics, yeah, so Surface stuff. So all that stuff is basically here in the external package, right? So if you had a third-party library, if you had your own library, you wanted to put it somewhere, this would be a good place to put it. Okay? Next we have frameworks. So frameworks is where all the frameworks go that Android provides. So this would be libraries, this would be frameworks. So this is a very important place because there's a lot of very good stuff in here, right? So for example, if you're looking at media stuff, Well, there's frameworks-based media. So all the media-related things are here. We're going to talk about it later on, right? If you're looking at graphics, so there's your graphic support. If you're looking at location, which we're going to look at next, there's a support for location, and so on and so on. Okay? So this is where a lot of those things go, the frameworks. Next we have hardware, and this is where hardware-specific things go, right? So a lot of these things here are meant to abstract the actual physical hardware. So that's why we have lib hardware is here, right? So that's basically the abstraction layer. This may sound familiar, right? QCOM GPS, right? QCOM media, stage fight, right? And the MM core and MM video and GPS. So any of this familiar? Right. So that's basically the hardware stuff. Lib core. So those are some core libraries. NDK. Here's your NDK. Here's your NDK build. That's where it comes from, right? Right. So this is your entire NDK here. There's your tool chains. Right. ARM Linux, ARM EABI, and ARM x86, right? I mean x86. That's your NDK. Then we have SDK. It's right here. Okay. So these are the various SDK tools, right? So remember we looked at TraceView. That's where TraceView code is, right? For instance. So that's basically those are basically some of the important packages. Packages subdirectory is where all the things that are bundled with the application are, right? So for example, apps are here. So the apps that get included into the project are here, right? So these are your applications that go into your device. So you put them in packages, apps, right? And so on. Wallpapers, any content providers, any keyboards, that stuff goes into here, right? Pre-built is things that are pre-built. So for example, Linux kernel, like I said, is just a pre-built module that ships with Android, right? So that's where that stuff goes, right? So that's where, for example, various kernel components go and so on. Those are pre-built modules. SDK system is where a lot of system-related things go. Well, we're going to talk about that later. But system core, for example, is where some of the configuration about user IDs and such go, right? initRC goes here. Okay. So that's system. Now, so this is the source code you downloaded. Okay, you guys got this source code. Who ran make? You did? No? Who did make on it and it worked out successfully? Nobody had a successful make? Okay, you made before. Okay, on not on the virtual machine but somewhere else?
Yeah.
On a virtual machine? Oh, on a different virtual machine. Okay. Okay, and why did it fail on this one?
I don't know, I didn't check it carefully. Some files missing.
Okay.
Not sure how some compare.
Okay. So something was missing. Okay, and it didn't do it. Okay, that's fine. So basically, okay. So that is the that's basically how where all this stuff goes before it's built. Now, when you build it successfully, this is what happens. You get a directory called out. Okay, And out is then, it has a subdirectory for targets. So for different targets, it's going to have different subdirectories. So product generic is going to be for our generic version of our target, right? So next, let me see. Let me show you like this. So basically what happens is, once you do a build, we are going to create all these subdirectories. So this directory here, system, that is the same directory as on the file system of a device. Okay? So that directory system is this, is if I go onto ADB shell, cd system, okay, ls, that is the same directory. That is that directory. It's on the device. Right? So that's the system. Now, system, before it gets installed in the emulator, it gets created into an image. So this is the system image, system.img file. So that's the file that we are going to be using for the emulator. So that is, remember I said yesterday, that's the final output of us building a platform. It's system.img file. Any questions on this so far? Okay, so what we talked about so far is, so we talked about Bionic, we talked about build, Dalvik, development, devices, external, framework, hardware, out, package, and pre-build, SDK and system. Okay. Now let's do a little experiment. So what I want to do is create a little application, okay, and have that application installed into the device, right? So what I would like to do is I would like to be able to, when I load up a device, I would like to have some kind of application in here that is like, it's going to be one of these icons, and it's going to be an application that's built into the device. Okay. So so let's do let's create a new one. And we've been talking about location today, right? So here's what I'm thinking. Let's create a little application that's simply going to print out our current location. Okay? You know the example that we have, where am I? We can do that application, okay? All right? So you guys can do this as well, and then we're going to plug it into the platform. Then we're going to create a new platform, rebuild it, and see if it's still, if everything is there, okay? So here's what we're going to do. I guess I need my Eclipse after all. This is going to be a very simple application. So I'm going to say Eclipse new Android project. Okay. And I'm going to call it location demo. Okay. Location demo is the name of my application, right? So SDK 2.2. It's actually, I'm building it for 3.0 for Gingerbread. So I'm going to go with the Gingerbread. You guys can go with the with Froyo. Right? Application name is going to be location demo. Package is going to be com example location. Activity location activity. And minimum SDK I'll put 9. So this one really truly requires the latest greatest Android, right? So far so good. So we now have our hello world, right? Location demo, right? It's just like hello world. And just like hello world, there are a couple of files that were important, right? There's the layout file, and then there's the activity, the Java file, right? First of all, just so you guys can see on the monitor, I'm gonna turn this color to, I'm gonna reverse the color. You don't have to do this. Just because I have a poor, sorry, not monitor, but projector. You guys can't see it, so I'm gonna add something here. Android style, theme, light. Okay, so that is basically gonna help make my application look like this. So black on white as opposed to white on black, just for contrast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify this user interface just a little bit, okay? So I'm going to, do you want to do, let's think about this. I'm going to leave, yeah, well, let's just do the world's simplest. We're going to keep it super, super simple, right? So what we're going to do is just change, add an ID to this piece of text so that we can find it, just like we did for Fibonacci, right? So I'm going to say control space, Android ID, okay, equals, and then give it some kind of ID. So I'm going to say at plus ID slash out. That's going to be our output, okay? And the default text I'm going to remove. There's just no default text. I'm going to make it just a little bigger, my text, so I'm going to say I'm just going to say Android. So let me see, text size. Oops, text size. And I'm going to, just because it's so you guys can see, I'll put 30 SP. That's a unit. Okay, that's just to make the text big, right? So you can see in the back. Okay, so this is the world's simplest user interface. We just have one label, one piece of text where we can output something, right? So far, so good. Okay, so now in the Java file, just like before, I'm gonna define text view, text, I'll call it out, organize imports, we're gonna work with locations. So I'm also gonna define my location manager, and I'm gonna define location, and then also organize imports. So I'm just defining a couple of variables. I do Control Shift O. That's why you guys don't see it, but you know this all got imported in here, right? The XML, yeah, right here. So basically, the only thing that is important is this. That's it. Nothing else is important in this file. So at plus ID slash out. Just want to make a tiny little note here. So remember, don't do this. But if I had some default text like Android, I'm gonna remove this. This is just to show you. So if I had some default text and I said waiting for location, for example, and if you look at it here, everything looks good, right? Yeah. And as a matter of fact, if I run this, it's gonna run okay. However, if when you try to install an application into Android source like this, it's not going to work because it's much more strict about things like this. So what's the problem with this? It's not internationalized, right? I would have to put this into my strings XML, then refer back to it, right? So I'm not going to do that, but but you know, that's, I just kind of wanted to point that out, right? So I would have to do it properly. Where's that? I'm gonna remove that just so that it doesn't complain. Okay. So so everyone got this so far? So this part, yeah. Okay. So now we're gonna initialize a couple of things. So basically, our out is gonna be just like before, text view, and then control space. You say find view by ID. R dot ID should be there. Dot and then out. Okay. So that finds our text, our little output, so we can print stuff out, right? So far so good on that? Okay, so now that we have the out figured out, we also want to figure out our location manager. Okay, so location manager is, do you remember that line that I said it's the only important line that we have? So remember when we were looking at where am I example on page like 181, I think. So location manager is going to be a location manager, right? And then again, similar thing, do a space, control space, and then say get system service, okay? And then on this list, find the system service that is called location service. There it is. So you don't have to do a lot of typing. Okay, so now we could actually use the location, but I'm not going to do it from on create. I'm rather going to put it into on start, because I want to be able to restart my application to see if there's a change. So as opposed to putting it all in on create like we did before, this time I'm just going to do at override, and then I'm going to say public void on start, and then super dot on start. Whenever you override these, you gotta call the super, so you kind of have to do it. Okay. Now I can do something useful. You can also use source override implement methods, right? Like we did before. Remember? Okay. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to basically say I'm going to find the location. So location is going to be location manager dot get last known location. So what we need to give it is we need to give it a provider. We need to tell it which provider we're going to use, right? So what we could do is we could define provider as a constant so that I don't have to type it all here. So I'll say provider here, but then I'm going to define it as a constant. I'll say static final string provider, and it's going to be a location manager dot GPS provider, for instance. Right, so just it saves me some typing here, right? So we're going to work with GPS. So far, so good? Okay, so now that we have the location, so we will check, you know, if we have a location. So if location is not null, right, then we would do something with that location. So we could do now out.append, just like we did before, and we can print something out. So I can say string.format, right, and I can say \n, percent, is it F, right, for float, right, percent F, so I can say latitude, \n long percent F, something like that. And then for arguments, I'll say location dot get latitude, comma, location dot get longitude, right? Let's see, so what am I missing? Semicolon, format. Okay, so that's, for example, my you know, location. You can add more stuff, right? We can add bearing and all that other stuff. But let's try something simple, right? Now, if location is null, I would simply say else out dot append location not yet available or known. Something like that, right? So far, so good on this. Okay, so this is now our application, you know, and everything compiles. So, and presumably it works. So we haven't even tried it. There's one thing that we are missing and that we need for location, and that's we need a permission for location. So open up your manifest file, right? And let's click on permissions, and let's add two permissions. So two uses permissions. One is going to be access location access find location, okay, and the other one is going to be access course location. So we technically just need find because that's for GPS, okay, but this is for network, right? So again, I'm in a manifest file. So look, our manifest file, open manifest file, click on permissions tab, okay? Click on add and choose uses permission, not permission, okay, but uses permission, okay? And add these two, permission access find and access course. I'm adding course just in case later on we want to play with a different provider, you know, just to see how it works. But technically we don't need it. This is just some printout. You can come up with any printout, but location, you know, we get a location, and if we actually got a valid location, so it's not null, we print out latitude and longitude of that location. That's it. And window. It's a double. It doesn't really matter. You can add as many of these as you want, right? So I'm just kind of adding a couple of properties, right? Append. So is everyone good on this? Make sense? What we're doing? Yeah. Okay. So we now have it. Now normally you would run this on the emulator and bam, install it. Right? That's what we normally do, but we're not going to do that, because doing that would mean that we're basically installing it as a user. That would mean that it would go into /user/app. Okay, that's not our goal now. Our goal now is to install this permanently into a custom image. Okay, got it? So we want to create a new Android image, operating system image, right? So here's what we're gonna do. So we have that. We need to put that source code into packages apps folder. Okay, because remember that's where custom applications go. So it's in packages apps folder. This is where all the system applications go. Okay. Now, as opposed to copy pasting it, I'm going to create a symbolic link. So I'm simply going to do this. I'm going to cd into packages apps and say ln, my workspace, right? Oops, Android codem, and I'm going to find location demo. Okay, and I'm going to link it in here. Make sense? That's part one. So now if I do ls, there are all the system. Look, there's audio, Bluetooth, browser, calculator, location. Bam, right? So we added a new application into our Gingerbread or Froyo, right? Distribution. Got it? Okay. Next, we need to create a make file for it. So the make system is quite different than in Eclipse. Before, in Eclipse, you guys just click on save and bam, everything's compiled and made and all that stuff, right? Well, now it's different. It doesn't work that way. Okay, so we gotta create a make file. So we need a file called android.mk. So you can do it in Eclipse. So you can right click on your project, right? Or you can do it in VI or whatever you guys prefer. But I'm gonna do it here. I'm gonna right click on my project and say new file. But do it in the root of your project, right? And I'm gonna say the file name is android.mk. It's always gonna be like that, android.mk. Bam, there it is, right? Well, it's an empty file. So how do we figure out the files, this file, right? So remember I was showing you where to get this documentation. I said porting. This is where the make system is explained. Let me go back like this. Come on. Okay, so this is where the build system is explained and all that. They also include something called the cookbook, right? So you can just find your recipe. And there is my recipe, building a simple APK. That's what we're doing. We're building a very simple APK. So I'm going to copy paste this. Bam. So again, I went into source Android.com, porting, build cookbook. That's one way. Second way is just to take it from another similar application, right? So I could have copied it from alarm clock or something, right? But I'm going to copy it from here. Okay. So cannot paste content select. Okay. So I'm going to fix this, make this my make file, right? Remove the spaces, and I'm going to change just one thing, package name. So package name now is what? Location demo. That's right. So that's our location demo. That's going to call all the subdirectories, build all that stuff, and off we go. Now Eclipse compiles it as well, but when we're simply using, as a matter of fact, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to turn off build automatically, because we're not using Eclipse build system right now. Okay? because I don't want it to compile, because now we're compiling it. You know, I may want to compile it just to check that it's actually working, you know, because it's faster just to compile this one little project here in Eclipse, but ultimately we're compiling it into the platform, so we got to create the makefile system. So this is the makefile. Did you guys get this one? Everyone copied it? Online? No? So you copy paste it, change one word. Half the word. Because it was local something and now it's location. Okay. So we did that. Oh, we now need to add this to a make file to tell it to include it. So we need to basically change the product packages variable. Remember, product packages is where you specify what gets included. So remember, make system, we said it's build, target, product, and then somewhere in there. So in your build, target, product, okay, see how there are all these different versions. Well, if you want to include it in all, I'm just going to go with core. Okay, so I'm going to open up core, okay, and I'm just going to add it in here. This is my core. This is including everything, right? Product name, product device, and so on and so on. Some of you are asking what you configure all that system properties. So here's some: alarm, alert, you know, notification, sound, and so on. Okay. So I'm going to include it here in this list of applications. Same place where, like, you know, phone is and all this stuff. So I'm going to say location demo, and I add it to the make file. Okay. Now I'll let you guys work on do that. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my home, the gingerbread directory. Okay. And I'm simply going to say make and hope for the best, right? So now that's running a make, and that's what we're building, right? That's our setting. So again, I just added it to my core, which is in your build, target, product, and then core. For example, you could add it to like generic or some other make file, right? But it just depends on what you want to accomplish. I'm including it now in all my products, all my builds. So this is now building, okay? And this should be fairly quick. Now, it's because it's just repackaging everything. It's going to recompile it and repackage it. It's probably going to fail, actually. First time around, I think it's going to fail now. And then we're going to see why, right? Oh, so if we don't change core.make, it's not going to, not in this case, not for applications. So it's actually necessary. You do have to change to add it to one. You need to add it to this.
You add this.
Yes, but just putting it into packages, just doing this is not going to include it.
Or for this folder. Other folder is like.
Yes, for other folders it will. Later on, when we're going to change framework, and that will actually search all the make files. Yeah. But this is not going to do it. Okay, so yes, it's not going to do it. In this case, by the way, it didn't do a make. So let me do this. I'm going to actually go packages, apps, okay, and I'm going to go manual location demo. And I'm going to do a make here. Or I'm going to do MM instead, right? To make from here. That's what runs the local make, right? So I did packages apps MM. Now this failed, right? Why? Why did it fail? Anybody? So the make system is different, like I said, right? So what happens with the normal in Eclipse, we are, remember our generated files. These are the files that are automatically generated. So our file is actually here. But this is a different make system than this make system that does this. So I actually need to get rid of all this stuff, because otherwise it's going to say, whoa, this make is going to create R somewhere else, and now we have two R's. So that's why it's complaining. So what I need to do, I need to either not use Eclipse at all, or I can use Eclipse, but make sure that you do source, that you do a project, turn off build automatically, and then clean. I'm going to clean this project. Right, so I'm gonna get rid of. Did it get rid of it? Project clean. Keeps regenerating it. Okay, so I'm gonna do it then from command line. So this is my project right now. I'm gonna rm, okay, -rf. I'm gonna get rid of gen and bin because I don't need them anymore, right? Bam, gone. So now if you do okay, let's see. Okay, so now it did install it. So now it built a new APK, and it put it in the output directory. Out target product generic system app blah, right? So now if I go cd a couple of directories back, right, and do make, let's see if that's, I may have to delete the intermediary files because I'm not sure if it's going to know that that one changed, but we'll find out. So let me see in the out directory. So out. So current day is February 24. My last system image was February 21, so it's old. Okay, so we need to see if this actually changes. Okay, nothing to do, so it didn't change it. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna force it this way. I'm gonna actually remove some of the stuff. So I'm gonna delete this file and this file to force it to remove. So hold on, I'm gonna just delete them, and now I'm gonna tap make. So that's now gonna make that, because basically it just needs to repackage it. So you can just get rid of your system image, okay, and that should do it. Okay, so here it is. So it's basically repackaging. So it's creating a new intermediate files, and that's our new system.img file. Okay, so that's pretty quick, right? Rebuild. And if I verify here, there's my new system.img, and it's built today, right? And the time is 10:41 p.m. 10:41 p.m. So it's a match, right? So far, so good. Okay. So how do we run this? How do we flash this onto the hard drive of the phone? Huh? Yeah, except we're going to do it on the emulator, right? So on the I'm going to kill my emulator. I'm going to now run it from a command line, right? And say emulator-avd. I showed you this before, right? We did this before, right? I'm also going to scale it down so that we can fit in my screen, right? So this is just so that it fits my screen, so don't worry about that. But here's the key. I'm now going to, because remember, this is now going to go to that directory, .android/avd/myphone, and it's going to look at where to find the system image. And it's going to go and typically, let me start it. It's going to look at the system image of the platform. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to say -system. Okay. We're going to override that. And I'll say out target product generic system.img. Okay. And one more that I need to do, which I didn't know before that I had to, but RAM disk as well we need to override. So out target product generic RAM disk.img. Okay, and I'm gonna start this. So I'm basically to a different RAM disk and a different system image. Okay, because before it would go to AVD and it would look at AVD and it would say, open up such and such file, right? Before it would do this, it would go to dot Android AVD myphone.avd config, right? And it would say, oh, okay, the system directory is in platforms Android 9 images, right? Which is basically, it would do ls, let me show you, it would look at this file, my SDK, so Android, SDK Mac, and it would go into platform subdirectory, right? So that's what it would do before. So it would go and point to this image. This is the one that ships with a standard Android that we downloaded online. But we're now overriding that. We're saying, no, go and use our custom built system. Okay? So that's booting. Hopefully it's going to boot. I don't know. We'll find out. All right, so it's coming up. Okay, so there's my phone. Okay, so I'm going to unlock it and let's take a look what's inside. Okay, so I'm gonna go to applications. Bam. Okay, and do we see location demo? There it is, right? So there's a location demo. Okay. And if I open it, location not yet known. It doesn't know the location, right? We obviously don't have GPS and so on. That's fine. That's by design. So, but what I wanted to show you is that now if I look at, I'm going to open DDMS. See, DDMS doesn't know about it. All right? So if you guys depend on Eclipse, you're kind of stuck, right? So, what's the solution to that? ADB kill server, ADB start server. So hopefully that fixes it. Reboots the connection, tells Eclipse, hey, there it is, bam. Okay, file system. Come on, give me the file system. There. So, remember we talked about the file system and we said typically the user applications, the ones you install, are installed here. So there's our Qualcomm Hello, there's our Fibonacci, there's our logging client, logging service, right? But location is not in here, right? So in other words, it's going to be, we wanted to install it as a system service. These are the system services. And there it is, location demo. It's installed as a system service. Okay? You cannot uninstall it. It's on the read-only file system. Make sense? Okay, so just to kind of like recap, so what we did is we created an application and we put it in locations, packages, apps directory. We actually linked it, right? We created a make file for it. We added it to a build. You actually do this. You have to add it to one of. You don't have to do it in core, and you probably don't want to do it in core, but you got to do it to one of the. This property basically needs to list it, okay? And you actually have to do mm in this directory, so you mm it, and then you make it to repackage the system.img. So, okay, so that's that. So far, so good on that. What's the difference between system applications and user-defined applications? Well, technically nothing, right? All applications are created equal, right? That's the whole point of Android, right? System application is not any superior than a user application, right? So you remember how, like, well, you don't remember. In iPhone, for example, certain applications like Safari browser or iCal or Mail, they're superior. You cannot replace them, right? In Android, you can replace every application, right? So that's the whole point, right? But sometimes I don't mean sometimes replace doesn't really mean replace it, because we now put this in our application is now stored on a read-only file system, so you cannot really get rid of it. So there's technically not a lot of difference other than it's on a read-only file system. So if you want to include certain applications you may have an application that you want to start at boot and always have it run, like a service, maybe a tracking service or something, security service, whatever it is, right? So if you put it in a user directory, in a user file system, user can actually get rid of this. If you put it in this file system, user cannot get rid of it. So that would be one difference. Okay? Any other questions on this? Okay, so let's take a short break, and then what we're going to do afterwards is we're going to modify the framework. Now we have an application. Let's see how this application talks to the other parts of the system, okay? So that's the plan.